Good evening and welcome to a happy Halloween happening. This is your host, Alan Dembones Mason, and we have a full complement of people here on board to entertain you tonight. Well, New Orleans, is the epicenter of the Halloween universe. And were it not for this pandemic and the occasional blackouts due to Hurricane Zeta, the streets would be filled with revelers, and the French Quarter will be hosting tour group after tour group tonight. Well, instead, we will feature tonight a little bit of what makes New Orleans so very special with members of the theater community as well as the music community and even the religious community all coming together to entertain you. If it's a little bit dark out there, we hope that it improves very soon. We're looking to see if you can see us. If you're able to, give us a shout right now. Let us know that you can see us in the comments. Let us know that we're not blacked out, which is my greatest fear. In any event, let's see if we're going to be seen tonight. And if not, we'll have to blame StreamYard again. I'm really not sure why this happens, but sometimes when we set up broadcasts ahead of time, we get a black screen. That's why I don't normally broadcast until right before the last hour, and it usually works. But let's see if it'll work. We're still looking. It's only a little bit of time. We'll go ahead and try to put our first guest up. This will be Ariadne Blade, the playwright. She's going to be giving us a taste of an original piece that she has. It's titled, well, I'll let her do all of the honors and share out what it is that she's going to be doing for us tonight. So, without any further ado from me, let's go ahead and make sure that we can have Ariadne take it away. Thank you.
Ariadne. Well, I am not certain you all heard that.
I am not certain you all
There
heard
are
that.
some comments. Let's see.
There are some
You can't
comments.
hear.
Let's see.
All right.
You
We're going
can't
to try to do
hear.
this again.
All right.
We're
going to try to do this
bring
again.
her back
I will
later
promise
on.
to bring
Let's
her
see if we can
back
try with another
later
one.
on.
This is
Let's
from
see
the
if we can
Reverend
try with another one.
Ward,
This is from the
who
Reverend
has the
Andrew
Ward
Ward, who has the
warning
Ward
song.
Word
Let's try this
warning
I'll try to
song.
upload the
Let's try
other
this one. I'll try to upload the other one while we're listening to this and see if perhaps we can get Ariadne back on. Again, Andrew Ward, the Reverend Andrew Ward, and the Ward Word warning song.
Okay, I think we're here. Guys, there's some really strange things happening. I mean, it's Halloween, it's New Orleans, all kinds of weird circumstances are currently underfoot. And I need to warn you. No matter what you do, no matter what anybody says, no matter how unsuperstitious you are, never laugh when the hearse goes by. For you may be the next to die. They wrap you up in a long white sheet from your head down to your feet, and they put you in a big black box and cover you up with dirt and rocks. And all goes well for about a week, but then your coffin starts to leak, and the worms crawl in, and the worms crawl out, and the worms play pinochle on your snout. They eat your eyes, they eat your nose, they eat the jelly between your toes. And a big green worm with rolling eyes crawls in your stomach and out your thighs. Your stomach turns a slimy green, and pus comes out like whipping cream. And so you spread it on a slice of bread, and that's what you eat when you are dead. And the worms crawl out, and the worms crawl in, and the worms that crawl in are lean and thin. The worms that crawl out are fat and stout. Your eyes fall in, your hair falls out, and your brain comes tumbling down your snout as the worms crawl in and the worms crawl out. They squirm all over your rotting mouth. Your chest caves in and your eyes pop out. Your brain turns into sauerkraut. And they invite their friends, and their friends too, and they all come down to chew on you. And that is what it is to die. I hope you had a nice goodbye. Did you ever think, as the hearse goes by, that you would be the next to die? This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but a whimper. Happy Halloween!
Ooh, that's scary. Well, the Reverend Andrew Ward. And again, that was his warning about why you don't whistle or laugh when a hearse passes by. All right, we have, well, a few minutes into our broadcast. We hope that you'll stick with our happy Halloween haunting tonight. Again, we hope that all of our technical problems have been cured. We are going to be moving forward. We have a number of other things that we want to be able to show you. But as of right now, I'm trying to actually upload a few things and publish some things under my own name. While I'm doing that, I will perchance have an opportunity to regale you with one of my own offerings. This is one that I did a few years back. It's called Scary Stuff, and we hope that you will enjoy it as best you can.
I woke up on a Saturday, a little after 5. The nap I'd taken was too short, felt more dead than alive. Peering outside of my window, I saw that it was dark. The streetlights came on suddenly, but not across the street in the park. A fog seemed to roll in wearily. It was an heavenly mist, made my hackles rise up eerily, as if by witch's lips 'twas kissed. I had this uneasy feeling that something was not right. I somehow knew instinctively this was no ordinary night. And as I watched in amazement, a dark cloud moved down from the sky. It wriggled and teemed with movement, the billowing fog affixed to my eye. But it wasn't a cloud filled with mist or moisture as found in the rain. It appeared to be thousands of bats moving back and forth again and again. They lighted on the park's monkey bars, an unholy demonic black host. From the left side arose a specter, the frightening figure of a ghost. I could hear strange sounds emitted by manner of ghost and of beast. They whistled and flapped from the north gate, past the south gate, and on towards the east. The air became heavy and laden with these sounds from the netherworld. Then the first ghost was joined by a second, and a ghastly banner they unfurled. It spooked Saturday read the banner that was held by these two phantasms. It was naturally painted in bloody letters that made my stomach go into spasms. And then, as if that weren't enough, and it seemed it was right on cue, a multitude of gruesome goblins was added to this frightening crew. Their heads were made of pumpkins, whose faces were intricately carved with expressions of shock and horror, like they had been shot or had starved. My heart started racing like mad as I watched them sinuously prance. They slithered, they strutted, they swaggered in a bizarre and ghoulish new dance. Beads of sweat started pouring out my forehead. My hands had turned clammy and cold. It was then that this rabble grew ugly with an eeriness hard to be told. They whipped themselves into a dither. They were joined then by zombies and freaks, every vile creature you can imagine, whose body now crackles and creaks. I had thought they wouldn't have noticed as I witnessed this supernatural sight, but fate was to have other plans for me on that tortuous night. Their piercing red eyes looked about, and in my direction they stared. I can tell you that even Goliath or the Terminator would have been scared. I wondered what had triggered their outrage, what on earth had given me away. Then I realized that the light from my window was shining, much to my dismay. This macabre mob then turned towards me and started to cross the street. My knees got weak. I gulped my throat. I wanted to retreat. But strangely, I stood transfixed there, unable to move a muscle. Their moans grew louder as they drew near. The crowd began to hustle. I stood there hopeless, watching them as their horrible din hurt my ears. The smell of death came into my house and heightened the worst of my fears. Some were shouting, some were raving, some of them were beheaded. Some were vampires, other werewolves, and all of them I dreaded. Smoke was billowing from my door as they quickly entered my home. These horrific figures enveloped me in a spooky demonic black foam. From out of the middle of the seething stew with bony white skeleton hands, there came a huge figure of death who malevolently made his demands. No mortal can live and tell the tale of the special day that we share. And as he spoke, I found myself kneeling for the benefit of penitent prayer. You are too late for that, he laughed. My unfortunate little friend, no power on earth can save you from this, your untimely end. My head was reeling, my heart was pounding, the pressure was all just too much. The fiendish horde surrounded me as this devil extended his touch. A coldness spread past my face, and blackness fell like the dew. I had no time to ponder my fate as strange things began to ensue. The room started swirling round and round. My faculties were so diminished, it took little time to understand that life for me was finished. But my last conscious thought was curious. From one of the ghosts came a shock. Let's agree to wake him next Saturday. How do you feel about 5 o'clock?
There you have it. Again, another bit of scary stuff for just you. Hopefully you're having a good, happy Halloween happening tonight. We are trying our best to present to you several different presentations. Tonight, we've already had Ariadne Blade. We're going to bring her back because some people had complained they couldn't hear her, and she has such a lovely voice, we must insist you hear her tale. Coming up next, we have a video from Tim Fahey and the story of Stingy Jack. Let's see if we can get this one to come up right. And we will attempt to make sure that this shows up. I know that I have to do a little bit of checking because the problem was it wasn't showing up the right way. We're going to try to do this a little bit differently. And I'm going to go back to my channel to make this work. I want to thank Tim for providing this video and also for his lovely wife, the wonderful Lena Prima, who helped to basically edit this and get it all together. So we're going to have Stingy Jack. If you'll just give us a second, we'll have it coming up. The legend of Stingy Jack.
This is an old tale about a foul drunkard of a blacksmith known as Stingy Jack. Jack was a two-faced, deceitful schemer who thrived on manipulating people. His selfish spirit possessed not a shred of humanity or kindness for anyone, and the homeless beggars only repulsed him. Word of his vile reputation reached Satan, who took more than a passing interest in this evil man. So he put plans in motion to meet it. One evening in the dark hills of rural Ireland, one of Satan's devils posed as a dead man, waiting for Stingy Jack to run into him. When Jack came across the body, a deranged face with wide eyes and an evil grin stared back at him. Stingy Jack instantly realized that his time was up, that the devil had come to collect his soul. He begged for a final request, which the demon granted. Jack told him that he wanted just one more drink before he had to depart the world, and he took the devil to the nearest tavern. Well, one drink turned into another, and then another, and before too long their consumption of alcohol far exceeded the supply. There was nothing left for the pair to drink. When it's time for them to settle up the bill, Jack didn't have any money. He casually turned to his new drinking buddy, Satan, and suggested that since he was a devil with magical powers, he could simply transform himself into a piece of silver to pay the tab. The devil obliged, but instead of paying, Jack rammed the coin into his pocket. Aware that Stingy Jack had double-crossed him, the devil fought to get out. However, a crucifix in the pocket trapped him in. Jack made a deal with the devil, though. If he would leave Jack alone for a decade, he would release him from the coin. And so the deal was made between Jack and the devil. Once the 10 years was up, though, the devil found Jack once more, ready to take him to hell. This time, however, Jack asked for an apple from a nearby tree to quell his hunger on the long journey. While the devil selected an apple from the tree, Jack quickly carved 4 crucifixes on the bark of the tree, trapping the evil being within its branches. On the condition that he would never go to hell, Jack once again offered the devil his freedom. And once again, the devil had little choice but to submit to Jack's wishes. Stingy Jack continued the rest of his life, safe in the knowledge that he outsmarted the devil not once, but twice. Well, many years of alcoholism finally took their toll. Stingy Jack could outsmart the devil, but he could not outsmart death. When he found himself standing in front of the pearly gates, St. Peter turned him away. Heaven, as many people know, would not welcome a lying, deceitful drunk. Undiscouraged, Jack headed towards hell, where his nemesis was biding his time to get revenge. But Satan also refused him entry, citing the agreement they made never to condemn Jack to hell. Although neither heaven nor hell allowed Jack entry, Satan did grant one last wish. Jack asked for an ember from the fiery depths to give him a little light while he wandered the world in darkness. Satan picked one small red-hot coal and gave it to Jack. To carry his burning ember, Jack found a turnip and hollowed it out, turning it into a makeshift lantern. Ever since then, Jack's ghost could be seen wandering aimlessly around the Irish countryside. Whenever locals saw mysterious lights, they would say, "Yeah, that's just Jack of the Lantern." Later, the term became synonymous with the name for Stingy Jack's wandering spirit, Jack-o'-lantern. With evil Jack damned to wander the world until Judgment Day, the Gaelic Irish community did not want his spirit visiting their homes, so they took precautions on October 31st, the day of the Celtic festival of Samhain. On this day only, spirits of the netherworld could pass through to the world of the living. Ghosts were attracted to the living, so each home carved a menacing face into turnips and rutabagas and prominently displayed them on their doorsteps with a burning ember or candle, just like Jack's lantern. This, they hoped, would keep away the spirits, including Jack. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, the Irish migrated to America and brought along their beliefs, holidays, and traditions. They quickly realized that there was a type of gourd indigenous to America that was bigger and better for carving jack-o'-lanterns. Of course, this was the pumpkin. And so the eerie Irish tradition lives on. The same day as Samhain, October 31st, Halloween, 145 million Americans will have bought and carved a jack-o'-lantern. That's the story.
Wow. Love it, love it, love it. That is fantastic work by Tim Fahey. Again, I want to thank him for doing that. That was fantastic work, and a little bit of history there from Halloween from Tim Fahey, musician, voice artist, and again, a shout out to his lovely bride. Those of you who know a fantastic talent in her own right. Of course, I'm talking about the lovely Lena Prima, who did the editing on that piece. So thank you, Lena. Thank you, Tim. And again, we hope that it made your Halloween ever more special. So we've heard from the Reverend Andrew Ward. We heard from Tim Fahey. Earlier this evening, we heard from Ariadne Blade, and I'm going to repeat her contribution to tonight, if you will. Bear with us, those of you who saw it and were not able to hear what she said. I think it's really important that you hear what she says. This is an original piece, again, called Henry and Eleanor, and essentially what I ended up having to do was since it wasn't playing through the application, I ended up having to upload it to YouTube, and I'm going to share it now. So those of you who saw it before, saw the lovely Ariadne Blade but couldn't hear her, now hopefully you'll be able to hear what she had to say, and that it'll leave no doubt that she is a very talented playwright in and of her own way. So let's go ahead and see if we can share this out to you. Henry and Eleanor sharing it out for you as we go.
Hello, my name is Ariadne Blade. I am a writer, I'm a storyteller, I'm also a tour guide here in New Orleans. I work for Haunted History Tours. I have the very fun job of getting to give ghost tours and cemetery tours in and around the French Quarter. And tonight I'd like to read to you a little story that I've written. It's a short story. It's actually adapted from a Louisiana folk tale that I like to tell on my tours sometimes. This story is called Henry and Eleanor. Back in the days when life was hard and death came knocking before most folks were old enough to walk, there lived an inexplicably happy couple in the French Quarter of New Orleans. Their names were Henry and Eleanor. She pretty as a picture, he handsome as could be, and despite the difficulties of the time, they were terribly, overwhelmingly in love. Theirs was the kind of love that made folks want to shake their heads and say, well, that's just not fair. But it was such a pure love, such a kind love, that no one could really find it in their hearts to begrudge the couple their happiness. One winter, though, in that deep, damp cold down there in New Orleans, Henry caught pneumonia. For weeks, Eleanor sat up with him through the night as he struggled to breathe, feeding him good warm things and soothing him through his coughing fits. And thanks to her tireless care, he survived. They spent the spring picnicking and strolling on the levee and talking of all the good things to come, of a fine little house, and a couple of good, hardworking horses, and maybe their first little one by the end of the year. But then, that summer, the fever came. Every May, soon as the weather turned hot and vaporous, folks would start to drop like flies. They called it Yellow Jack, and no one knew what caused it. Those that could afford to leave town did so in those sweltering months, stayed away until death's hand had become a bit more discerning. Eleanor's folks had a little farm in Abita, and the couple planned to spend the summer there. But the night before their departure, Henry swooned in the parlor. Within hours, his skin had lost its youthful glow and taken on a sickly jaundice, his eyes straining yellow in their sockets. By the time the vomiting began, there was no denying that he had caught the dreaded fever. Bile, black as coffee grounds, poured out of him. A lake of sweat pooled under his pallid body. And in the delirium of the fever, he called over and over for Eleanor and begged piteously for her to come to him, although she was already sitting right there at his side, crying, kissing his burning forehead. Now, normally a man of Henry's constitution might survive Yellow Jack, young and strong as he was, but the pneumonia had robbed him of his full vigor, and he was weaker than he ought to be. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the fever had wrenched his last breath out of him. Henry was dead. It was early enough in the dying season that there were still undertakers to be found. Later in the summer, as the fever got greedier, there'd be too many bodies to collect and not enough willing men to transport and bury them all. And so they'd accumulate in the narrow streets, piles of corpses putrefying and bursting in the summer sun, outside homes where mothers sat vacant-eyed in dim, reeking rooms, waiting for the same death that had claimed all their children in less than the time it had taken to birth them. Eleanor was lucky in that at least her husband would have a proper burial, but perhaps she can be forgiven for not being particularly cheered by this small blessing. In a heavy black veil, she rode with the carriage as it trundled through the quarter to the cemetery, feeling in her bones each bump and jolt as the ragged streets jostled her husband's coffin. Henry was laid to rest in his family's tomb, a humble thing with a chipped stone angel atop. She sank down beside the tomb after they'd sealed up her beloved inside, her body racked with dry, crooning sobs. "Come home now," her relations said tenderly, but she refused to leave him. After an hour, they had to pry her away from the tomb and drag her out of the cemetery, her body limp in their arms. She returned to the cemetery the very next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Months passed, but for Eleanor, the world had stopped turning the moment Henry had drawn his last breath. Eleanor, everyone agreed, was the saddest widow New Orleans had ever seen. She never went anywhere but the cemetery, never talked to anyone but the absence where Henry had been. Every day she came to sit and whisper his name, lying her face against his tomb and taking comfort in the feel of cold, smooth marble on her cheek. Then, one day, just after the first faint chill of winter had crept into the air, Eleanor visited Henry's tomb after a particularly restless night, and the cool breeze lured her into a dreamless sleep. Dusk fell, and the long shadows of the afternoon slipped away under the velvety mantle of darkness. The groundskeeper had not bothered to check for any lingering visitors, and Eleanor stirred at the sound of the cemetery gate creaking shut, the jangle of keys as she was locked in. And as she returned fully to consciousness, she became aware of a startling sensation, the touch of a hand on her cheek. She opened her eyes with a start, and there, sitting in front of her, his fingers stroking the gaunt hollows of her face, was Henry. Her Henry, not a specter, but Henry in the flesh, and not the rotting, decaying flesh of a man 6 months dead, but a vivacious, whole Henry, glowing and youthful as the day they had wed. "Henry!" she exclaimed, and threw her arms around him. They rested for several moments in a desperate embrace, and when they finally pulled away, their gazes shined with love and fondness and the sweet balm of reunion. "It is so good to see you again, my love," he said, and she wept tears of joy at this dream come true, the return of her dear husband. "You're not dead after all," she cried. His smile faltered. "I'm afraid I am, my darling. Ultimately, it's a rather irreversible process. But you're here, and I'm here, and we..." And then Eleanor realized that she and Henry were not alone in the cemetery. Outside the other tombs sat dozens of other people, all with the same youthful glow, talking and laughing in the lee of the hulking tombs. "Who are all these people?" she asked Henry with alarm. "Ah, you see, my love, those are the citizens of the cemetery, like me. They are the dead." Eleanor was bewildered at how lifelike they seemed, how animated their conversations. Well, they seemed to be enjoying themselves. Yes, they are. We are. It was then that Eleanor heard it. A terrible sound, a rushing, roaring, clattering sound emanating from outside the gates of the cemetery. "Here they come," a man at the next tomb shouted, and there was a buzz of anticipation as everyone else in the cemetery turned to look out the gates. Eleanor followed their gaze to catch the source of the noise, and there, past the gates, she saw it. On the dark streets outside the cemetery, there was a crowd, hundreds shoving and pushing as they passed each other in the streets. But this was like no crowd Eleanor had seen. They were not men, women, and children. They were skeletons, dry, brittle skeletons, a mob of them all rushing past in different directions, and the clattering sound was made by the bits and pieces of bones that fell to the ground and shattered to dust as they jostled each other in their hurry. Eleanor turned to Henry, horrified. "What is this terrible specter?" "Well, you see, my dear," Henry said, a bit embarrassed, "well, that is how we dead see the living. All of you rushing by day after day, each so anxious to win a race to where? Here." He gestured around at the cemetery, its rows of cold marble tombs. The vivacious dead had lost interest in the outside spectacle and had returned to their conversations, their laughter ringing in the dark. "And now that my race is run," Henry continued, "I realize I'm happier here than I ever was out there." "Happy?" Eleanor said. "Without me?" His face softened. "I miss you terribly, but we'll be reunited soon enough." "We will?" "Of course. So go and rejoin the race, my love. But walk, don't run. Enjoy the time you have left, because when you come back here, and I promise you will, we'll have an eternity to make up for that short time apart." Eleanor looked around at the other contented dead, animatedly telling stories of their happiest moments on the other side, the few times they had managed to slow down enough to savor it, to really see the world in all its beauty, to stop and truly listen to each other, care for each other. Henry squeezed her hand. "But you don't have to go right away. Not till dawn," he said. And so they spent the next several hours sitting together, reminiscing about the softest, sweetest moments in their short marriage, and promising not to forget each other until time's insistent march brought them together again. The other conversations gradually ceased as the night slipped into morning, and as the first fingers of light began to reach across the sky, Eleanor realized that the others had gone, faded away with the last of the darkness. Henry leaned over to kiss her one last time, and then he too was gone, disappearing as the sun's early rays suffused the cemetery in a tender glow. Soon enough, the groundskeeper was back, unlocking the gates, and as he shuffled into his little hut, Eleanor slipped past and out onto the empty streets. Back to the world of the living she returned, never to visit the cemetery again until her own race was run. And from that day on, everyone agreed Eleanor was the happiest widow New Orleans had ever seen. Thank you so much, everybody. Happy Halloween.
Thank you, Ariadne. What a beautiful story. And again, I'm glad that you got to hear it finally, because let's face it, it's a very nice story, and it's much better listening to it rather than seeing her. Again, Ariadne Blade, the playwright, thank you. Thus far, we've had contributions from Tim Fahey, the Reverend Andrew Ward, and I'm going to actually do one more. I actually had recited a poem before. I'm going to do my best to do justice to The Cask of Amontillado. It's a short story by Edgar Allan Poe, published back in 1847. And then we're going to finally close out with a cartoon that I want everybody to stick around for. Cartoons are always so much fun. This one in particular stars the one, the only Betty Boop. Did I say that right? The one, the only Betty Boop. So let's make sure that you stick around for that. So in the meantime, I'm going to read The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe. The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as best I could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. You, who so well know the nature of my soul, will not suppose, however, that gave utterance to a threat. At length, I would be avenged. This was a point definitely settled, but the very definitiveness with which it was resolved precluded the idea of risk. I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. A wrong is unredressed when retribution overtakes its redresser. It is equally unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who has done the wrong. It must be understood that neither by word nor deed had I given Fortunato cause to doubt my goodwill. I continued, as was my to smile in his face, and he did not perceive that my to smile now was at the thought of his immolation. He had a weak point, this Fortunato, although in other regards he was a man to be respected and even feared. He prided himself on his connoisseurship in wine. Few Italians have the true virtuoso spirit. For the most part, their enthusiasm is adopted to suit the time and opportunity to practice imposture upon the British and Austrian millionaires. In painting and gemmery, Fortunato, like his countrymen, was a quack. But in the matter of old wines, he was sincere. In this respect, I did not differ from him materially. I was skillful in the Italian vintages myself, and bought largely whenever I could. It was about dusk one evening, during the supreme madness of the carnival season, that I encountered my friend. He accosted me with excessive warmth, for he had been drinking much. The man wore motley. He had on a tight-fitting party-striped dress, and his head was surmounted by the conical cap and bells. I was so pleased to see him that I thought I should never have done wringing his hand. I said to him, "My dear Fortunato, you are luckily met. How remarkably well you are looking today. But I have perceived a pipe of what passes for Amontillado, and I have my doubts." "How?" said he. "Amontillado? A pipe? Impossible! And in the middle of the carnival?" "I have my doubts," I replied, "and I was silly enough to pay the full Amontillado price without consulting you in the matter. You were not to be found, and I was fearful of losing a bargain. Amontillado! I have my doubts. Amontillado! And I must satisfy them. Amontillado! as you are engaged, I am on my way to Lucrece. If anyone has a critical turn, it is he. He will tell me, Lucrece cannot tell Amontillado from Sherry. And yet, some fools will have it that his taste is a match for your own. Come, let us go. Whither? To your vaults. My friend, no, I will not impose upon your good nature. I perceive you have an engagement. Lucrece, I have no engagement. Come. My friend, no, it is not the engagement, but the severe cold with which I perceive you are afflicted. The vaults are insufferably damp. They are encrusted with niter. Let us go, nevertheless. The cold is merely nothing. Amontillado, you have been imposed upon, and as for Lucrece, he cannot distinguish Sherry from Amontillado. Thus speaking, Fortunato possessed himself of my arm, and putting on a mask of black silk and drawing a rocaille closely about my person, I suffered him to hurry me to my palazzo. There were no attendants at home. They had absconded to make merry in honor of the time. I had told them that I should not return until the morning, and had given them explicit orders not to stir from the house. These orders were sufficient, I well knew, to ensure their immediate disappearance, one and all, as soon as my back was turned. I took from their sconces 2 flambeaux, and giving one to Fortunato, bowed him through several suites of rooms to the archway that led into the vaults. I passed down a long and winding staircase, requesting him to be cautious as he followed. We came at length to the foot of the descent and stood together upon the damp ground of the catacombs of the Montresors. The gait of my friend was unsteady, and the bells upon his cap jingled as he strode. The pipe, he said. It is farther on, said I, but observe the white webwork which gleams from these cavern walls. He turned towards me and looked into my eyes with 2 filmy orbs that distilled the rheum of intoxication. Niter, he asked at length. Niter, I replied. How long have you had that cough? My poor friend found it impossible to reply for many minutes. It is nothing, he said at last. Come, I said with decision, we will go back. Your health is precious. You are rich, respected, admired, beloved. You are happy as once I was. You are a man to be missed. For me, it is no matter. We will go back. You will be ill, and I cannot be happy as once I was. You are a man to be missed, for it is no matter. You will go back. You will be ill. I cannot be responsible. Besides, there is Lucrece. Enough, he said. The cough's a mere nothing. It will not kill me. I shall not die of a cough. True, true, I replied. And indeed, I had no intention of alarming you unnecessarily, but you should use all proper caution. A draught of this medoc will defend us from the damps. Here, I knocked off the neck of a bottle which drew from a long row of its fellows that lay upon the mold. Drink, I said, presenting him the wine. He raised it to his lips with a leer. He paused and nodded to me familiarly while his bells jingled. I drink, he said, to the buried that repose around us, and I to your long life. He again took my arm, and we proceeded. These vaults, he said, are extensive. The Montresors, I replied, were a great and numerous family. I forget your arms. A huge foot d'or in a field azure. The foot crushes a serpent rampant whose fangs are embedded in the heel. And the motto, no me impune lecessit. Good, he said. The wine sparkled in his eyes, and the bells jingled. My own fancy grew warm with the medoc. We had passed through long walls of piled skeletons with casts and puncheons intermingling into the inmost recesses of the catacombs. I paused again, and this time I made bold to seize Fortunato by an arm above the elbow. The niter, I said. See, it increases. It hangs like moss upon the vaults. We're below the river's bed. The drops of moisture trickle among the bones. Come, we will go back ere it is too late. Your cough, it is nothing, he said. Let us go on. But first, another draught of the medoc. I broke and reached him a flagon of de Grave. He emptied it at a breath. His eyes flashed with a fierce light. He laughed and threw the bottle upwards with a gesticulation I did not understand. I looked at him in surprise. He repeated the movement, a grotesque one. You do not comprehend, he said. Not I replied. Then you are not of the Brotherhood. How? You are not of the Masons. Yes, yes, I said. Yes, yes. You? Impossible. A Mason? A Mason, I replied. A sign, he said, a sign. It is this, I answered, producing from beneath the folds of my roquelaire a trowel. You jest, he exclaimed, recoiling a few paces. But let us proceed to the Amontillado. Be it so, I said, replacing the tool beneath the cloak and again offering him my arm. He leaned upon it heavily. We continued our route in search of the Amontillado. We passed through a range of low arches, descended, passed on, and descending again, arrived at a deep crypt in which the foulness of the air caused our flambeau rather to glow than flame. At the most remote end of the crypt there appeared another less spacious. Its walls had been lined with human remains piled to the vault overhead in the fashion of the great catacombs of Paris. 3 sides of this interior crypt were still ornamented in this manner. From the 4th side, the bones had been thrown down and lay promiscuously upon the earth, forming at one point a mound of some size. Within the wall thus exposed by the displacing of the bones, we perceived a still interior crypt or recess in depth about 4 feet, in width 3, in height 6 or 7. It seemed to have been constructed for no especial use within itself, but formed merely the interval between 2 of the colossal supports of the roof of the catacombs, and was backed by one of their circumscribing walls of solid granite. It was in vain that Fortunato, uplifting his dull torch, endeavored to pry into the depth of the recess. Its termination the feeble light did not enable us to see. Proceed, I said. Herein is the Amontillado. As for Lucrece, he is an ignoramus, interrupted my friend, as he stepped unsteadily forward, while I followed immediately at his heels. In niche, and finding an instant he had reached the extremity of the niche, and finding his progress arrested by the rock, stood stupidly bewildered. A moment more, and I had fettered him to the granite. In its surface were 2 iron staples, distant from each other about 2 feet, horizontally. From one of these depended a short chain, from the other a padlock. Throwing the links about his waist, it was but the work of a few seconds to secure it. He was too much astounded to resist. Withdrawing the key, I stepped back from the recess. Pass your hand, I said, over the wall. You cannot help feeling the nitre. Indeed, it is very damp. Once more, let me implore you to return. No? Then I must positively leave you, but I must first render you all the attentions in my power. The Amontillado! Ejaculated my friend, not yet recovered from his astonishment. True, I replied, the Amontillado. As I said these words, I busied myself among the piles of bones which I have before spoken. Throwing them aside, I soon uncovered a quantity of building stone and mortar. With these materials, and with the aid of my trowel, I began vigorously to wall up the entrance of the niche. I had scarcely laid the first tier of the masonry when I discovered that the intoxication of Fortunato had in a great measure worn off. The earliest indication I had of this was a low, moaning cry from the depth of the recess. It was not the cry of a drunken man. There was then a long and obstinate silence. I laid the second tier and the third and the fourth, and then I heard the furious vibrations of the chain. The noise lasted for several minutes, during which, that I might hearken to it with the more satisfaction, I ceased my labors and sat down upon the bones. When at last the clanking subsided, I resumed the trowel and finished without interruption the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th tier. The wall was now clearly upon a level with my breast. I again paused, and holding the flambeau over the mason work, threw a few feeble rays upon the figure within. A succession of loud and shrill screams, bursting suddenly from the throat of the chained form, seemed to thrust me violently back. For a brief moment I hesitated. I trembled. Unsheathing my rapier, I began to grope with it about the recess, but the thought of an instant reassured me. I placed my hand upon the solid fabric of the catacombs and felt satisfied. I reapproached the wall. I replied to the yells of him who clamored. I re-echoed. I aided. I surpassed them in volume and in strength. I did this, and the clamorer grew still. It was now midnight, and my task was drawing to a close. I had completed the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th tier. I had finished a portion of the last and the 11th. There remained but a single stone to be fitted and plastered in. I struggled with its weight. I placed it partially in its destined position, but now there came from out the niche a low laugh that erected the hairs upon my head. It was succeeded by a sad voice, which I had difficulty in recognizing as that of the noble Fortunato. The voice said, "Ha ha ha! A very good joke indeed, an excellent jest. We will have many a rich laugh about it at the palazzo over our wine." "The Amontillado," I said. "Yes, the Amontillado. But is it not getting late? Will they not be awaiting us at the palazzo, the Lady Fortunato and the rest? Let us be gone." "Yes," I said, "let us be gone." "For the love of God, Montresor." "Yes," I said, "for the love of God." But to these words I hearkened in vain for a reply. I grew impatient. I called aloud, "Fortunato!" No answer. I called again, "Fortunato!" No answer still. I thrust a torch through the remaining aperture and let it fall within. There came forth in return only a jingling of the bells. My heart grew sick. It was the dampness of the catacombs that made it so. I hastened to make an end of my labor. I forced the last stone into its position. I plastered it up. Against the new masonry, I re-erected the old rampart of bones. For the half of a century, no mortal has disturbed them. In pace requiescat. The Cask of Amontillado. And I'm going to sign off right now because I'm not quite sure that YouTube will allow me to do what I want to do, which is to play this Betty Boop cartoon. So I'm going to end right now as if I'm ending. You all stick around. We're going to play the cartoon. And if for some reason YouTube decides to ban this particular broadcast, then I will edit it, cut it out, and they won't have anything to deal with at that point. As I said, one of my favorite cartoons starring Betty Boop, Mae Questel, of course, the voice of Betty Boop, and if you will pay close attention, Cab Calloway, the wonderful voice singing as Coco the Clown and doing a song that New Orleanians have always enjoyed for much of the last century. The piece, of course, St. James Infirmary. Again, we'll end our Happy Halloween haunting with this tonight. Thank you very much for being a part of our broadcast. And without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's us listen to Betty Boop, Cab Calloway, and everyone involved with Betty Boop and Snow White.
Made of pen and ink, she can win you with a wing. Yoo-hoo! Ain't she cute? Sweet Betty.
Magic mirror in my hand, who's the fairest in the land?
You're the fairest in the land. You're the fairest in the land.
I want to see my stepmama, stepmama, stepmama. I want to see my stepmama.
Our stepmama, the queen.
I've heard about your looking glass, looking glass, looking glass. I've heard about your looking glass.
What it says is so.
Magic mirror in my hand, who's the fairest in the land?
You're the fairest in the land. You're the fairest in the land.
Off with her head.
Okay, Queenie. What a shame. Poor Betty.
Always in the way. I can never play. My own mama would never say I'm always in the way. Don't leave me here alone. I don't want to breathe. Am I the fairest in the place?
If I were you, I'd hide my face.
Folks, I'm going down to St. James Infirmary. See my baby there, she's stressed out on a long white table. She's so sweet, so calm, so fair. Let her go, oh bless her. Wherever she may be, she will search this wide world over, but she'll never find another sweet man like me. Now when I die, bury me in my straight leg breeches, put on a box back coat and a Stetson hat. Put a $20 gold piece on my watch chain so you can let all the boys know I died standing pat. Then give me 6 rap shooting pallbearers. Let a chorus girl sing me a song. Put a red hot jazz band at the top man so we can raise hallelujah as we go along. Folks, now that you have heard my story, say, boy, hand me over another shot of that blues. If anyone should ask you, tell them I got those St. James Infirmary blues.
Magic mirror in my hand now. Who's the fairest in the land?
You're the fairest in the land.